So I'm going to kick us off. Welcome to everybody who has just joined us for today's session on technology and the response to the crisis caused by COVID-19. My name is Chris Yu. I am Exec Director for Technology and Public Policy at the Tony Blair Institute. We've been doing a range of work around the crisis and how governments ought to respond. And really excited today to be able to spend a bit of time digging into some of the questions arising from all of this to do with digital policy, the internet, public services, and how countries should respond. I have got three excellent guests with me, which I am really delighted to have here. And I think we're going to have some interesting debates and different perspectives on the conversation. So what I'll do first is introduce the guests, and then we will start to get stuck into some of the content. So first guest with us today is Catherine Miller from Doteveryone. Hi, Catherine. Great to have you with us. And we're loving the post-it notes on your home office wall behind you. Excellent. So Doteveryone is the responsible technology think tank, and Catherine has been leading a lot of the work there on policy and how we ensure that technology really serves the widest number of people possible for the greater good. Second guest with us today is Ed Vaizey. Ed was, I'm sure most of you will know, Digital and Culture Minister in the UK for a very long period of time, and by all extents that I've seen, very well regarded, and is now a senior advisor at FTI Consulting and remains, I think, a big champion of technology and the creative industries. And our third guest is Mike Bracken, who is on the line. Mike was co-founder of the Government Digital Service in the UK, which was an award-winning pioneer in digital government, and now a partner at Public Digital, where he's helping governments around the world with their digital transformation and digital leadership. So really thrilled to have all three of you with us today. So look, I'm going to kick off with a few questions that I would love to get your perspective on, and then we will throw it open to all of the folk who are here with us. And where I wanted to start was the kind of impacts of the crisis that we're living through and the lockdown, both in the UK and in other countries, and how the internet is helping us to cope. And I guess the first part of this is, really around the areas where maybe more has carried on than we might have expected, right? It feels to me like we've moved a lot of our lives online, that things which 10 or 15 years ago would have fallen over because of a lack of the ability to interact face-to-face or through traditional transactions have managed to carry on because of the internet. And apart from a few hiccups, broadband networks are holding up and businesses are moving online. What, in your opinion, seems to be working well, right? Who's having a good crisis in amongst all of this? Ed, maybe start with you.
Well, I wasn't sure whether that was a personal question, but first of all, it's great to be on this webinar, and I'll start by wishing a happy birthday to the head of the Global Institute, Tony Blair, who's 67 today. It's good that he's got this incredible webinar as his birthday present. I know he'll be watching and absolutely thrilled.
We'll sing around
the highlight of his birthday. I think what you said about broadband is very interesting. I spoke to the guys at BT about and said to them, this is the dog that hasn't barked. I was very used as the Minister for Telecoms getting a lot of grief about poor broadband coverage in the UK. But what seems to have happened, apart from, as you say, a few hiccups, is it has held up very well. Every day is like the Champions League, apparently. But BT sees a full load when it has a big Champions League game going on. And every day is like a Champions League. But the network is holding up very well. Having said that, I think some of the stuff that Doteveryone is highlighting about digital exclusion is also very important, because this crisis has shown that everyone does need to be online, and you can't forget, as it were, the 15% who may have poor connections or be without the right skills to participate in this online world. I should also add, apart from broadband, obviously mobile has held up very well. So that's something that's had, if you want to put it in those terms, a good crisis. And then I think the second thing is obviously issues like e-commerce, which will potentially fundamentally shift people's ways of consuming. It's clearly, you know, I've been in lockdown for 6 weeks, but I can still indulge in retail therapy to a certain extent, get things delivered, sometimes with delays, sometimes very promptly. And then I know we'll talk about this later, but obviously we'll concentrate on things like online education, online healthcare as well, and online working for those of us who are office workers, as it were, and how that will change. But I think the two highlights are the broadband network holding up and e-commerce.
Yeah. What's your take, Catherine? Because I guess, you know, a lot of things have shifted to the internet, but then there are also, as Ed mentioned, a lot of folk who are digitally excluded. And I guess some roles which, you know, you can't staff an ICU ward or drive a delivery truck from behind a Zoom call.
Yeah, I think, you know, as Ed points out, we're all kind of having it reinforce what amazing benefits technologies bring. And I think, so we've just done a piece of research that we're publishing next week, where we actually did a nationally representative survey just before lockdown came into place, and then focus groups just after. And in those focus groups, people, it was literally sort of 2 days after lockdown had started, and everyone would say, oh my goodness, thank God for the internet, because, you know, my kids can still talk to their friends, and I can still shop, and I can get this information. And it does just highlight a lot of the phenomenal things that the internet brings that we had started to take for granted. I think there's two things around the kind of exclusion question. There's the truly digitally excluded, the people who have no internet access or no digital skills. And I was struck that at our local food bank, the guys running the food bank said, you know, they're still meeting people who hadn't heard of coronavirus, you know, homeless people, sex workers, people who are really very much on the margins, didn't really know what's happening. So although some of us feel flooded with information, if you're not connected, you just don't know that. But I think the other thing that we've found through the work that we've done is that within people who use the internet, which is the vast majority of people in the UK, there's also a divide, and that richer people feel the benefits of technology far more than poorer people. That was true before the crisis hit. And now, as you say, you know, people who, it's predominantly people who are in low paid work, who can't continue to work digitally, who have to go out, be exposed to potential risk, and don't get that benefit of digitization. If you're a delivery driver, if you're stacking shelves in a supermarket, you're not feeling that. So there's a potential for a sort of tech left behind emerging from this crisis, and I think that's quite troubling. Yeah.
And what do you think about the like, we often talk a lot about the economic aspects of this, and, you know, which jobs can and can't be digitized, and, you know, what can shift online. What do you think about some of the social dimensions, right? Because we're missing, like, our communities and our local, you know, friendship circles and everything else, as well as the ability to go out to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I suppose there's an interesting thing of having done that research just after lockdown compared to how we all feel now, sort of 6-7 weeks in. And you realize that, yes, tech can do an awful lot, but God, there's a lot you miss. And particularly anyone with children will say, you know, you miss your friends, you know, grandparents miss their grandchildren desperately. And you know, this social contact is just irreplaceable, and we should never forget that.
Yeah, okay. Folk who are on the Zoom call, if there are questions and comments you want to chip in, then feel free to start popping them in the Q&A chat, and we will pick those up in a moment. And before that, I just wanted to talk to Mike a little bit around the kind of public service aspect of this. I mean, one thing that has surprised me is that, you know, things which maybe I feel like I've been told for years were too difficult or not possible, turns out they are possible. For example, I can now get a video call with my family doctor, and, you know, many other digital touch points. Do you think this is, I mean, how's this going down for governments? Is this like validating, you know, the work that you and others have done talking about moving public services online? What has it highlighted for you?
Well, it's precisely that. I mean, it's happening in the private sector as well. I mean, as well as public digital on several private sector boards. I mean, sacred cows are being slaughtered left, right, and centre here. Organizational dynamics generally lead to a higher level of importance being put on how things are done around here. Go join the army, you'll find out. And that means that wanting to change those things usually desires a crisis or public failure, and we have both of those now. So we're seeing anything from working practices around technology, perimeter security, that's gone, right the way through to interoperability of data. And what we're now seeing in governments is that, with public digital, we work with 24 governments around the world. We're doing a lot of work around the coronavirus. We help in California, Gavin Newsom with their response, as well as Canada. And what you're seeing straight away is a bunch of things. Is like people, I'll list a few. People who are in communications jobs are really generally pretty appalling at actually communication, because what this is exposed is a communication job in public sector is there to stop communication or filter a message or generally control and structure. And when you work in the open, the optics are all the other way around. The next thing is that you multidisciplinary teams, organizations, public and private, who've adopted internet era ways of working, where there is less of a hierarchy, less of a siloed structure, and more of a genuine team structure. They are winning hands down. Now, it's easy to point to Amazon and say, well, they're winning. They've always had that model. But many public organizations around the world who have got that model have had it work well. In parts of the UK, we should single out some of the work the UK's done. Good team in HSX, people like Maddie, Jen Alleman, GDS, doing great work because they're part of multidisciplinary teams involving policymakers, frontline workers, health specialists, and so on. So, that sort of way of working is here to stay. And for those people who, if it was needed to be shown that that's the way to organize yourself now, it's going to be very hard to go back now.
Yeah. And what do you think about... because we talk about the digital divide sometimes in terms of, on the public side, access to devices and broadband. I wonder a lot about the digital divide amongst organizations, right? The ones that are able to ride this change out and the ones which, when they have to pivot to the internet, can't make the leap. And are we going to see a kind of emergence as this shakes out of some organizations have accelerated their journey and are going to thrive?
Yeah.
Then a second set are going to be left behind.
Pretty much. And, you can draw a straight line between ways of working. So, for instance, organizations, some of them with very big cash piles who have done things like not adopted the cloud, not adopted remote working, not adopted interoperable standards, not publishing and working on the open internet, not having a services culture, not doing these like utter basics that are now part of a digital economy. They are struggling. For many years, governments were the model for that. And they're not anymore, actually. But many private sector organizations, you asked your first question, if I may answer that as well. You said, who's having a good pandemic? Banks are having a pretty good pandemic. A decade ago, we had a financial crisis and we sat here and said, well, liquidity, and apart from the odd Italian bank, they're pretty much liquid. They're coming through this. They're providing services. And they're doing that because I talked to the global CEO of one large British bank recently, and he said, well, we've got digital services working globally now from regional hubs, and we're rolling them out. We're getting sort of emergency loan services and, digital financial services in front of hundreds of thousands of people within 24 hours. We should recognize that the journey those banks have come on in 10 years. However, there are many organizations usually working in semi-monopolistic ways. Funnily enough, I was just thinking about trying to change my Virgin Media account. They are going to struggle. They're really going to struggle because it's like it's very easy to turn this stuff off and say, we're not going to work this way. It's incredibly hard to turn it on because at the heart of these ways of working lie usually a culture which is highly associated with open ways of working in the internet. Another group who are having a very good pandemic are the founding fathers of the internet. John Pastel, endlessly scalable sort of address name structures. No one's going to sort of clap for those old white beards, but what a pandemic they're having with these crises. Other organizations who've adopted the cloud. You asked me about adoption of technology. Those organizations who've still found reasons, usually like sort of really old school CIOs who found a reason not to embrace the cloud, and that's struggling right now. I mean, we are all having a sort of retail, as Ed says, sort of a retail pandemic, because many of these services are essentially highly scalable.
Yeah.
Organizations with open APIs that can iterate and scale at the moment are, doing quite well. Those without them are really going to struggle. Local governments having a very good pandemic because it has learned generally, particularly in the UK, to adopt a lot of these ways of working, largely to avoid some of the lockdown of the monopolistic IT contract that they've been saddled with. So there's a lot of winners here, but the straight line between them are those people who are embracing teamwork around internet era ways of working. If there's one sort of elevator pitch sentence, it's like, if you've got a multidisciplinary team working on the internet and they've been doing it for some time, you're in a good space. If you haven't, you're struggling.
Such a good point. Okay, so if folk are just joining us on Zoom or on the live stream, I'm here with Catherine Miller from Doteveryone, Ed Vaizey from FDI Consulting, and Mike Bracken from Public Digital, and we are talking about the internet and how it's helping countries respond to economic and social disruption caused by COVID-19. And we've had a couple of questions in the Q&A panel, so I'm going to just get the panel's thoughts on some of these, and we're going to start with, I guess, cyber and the kind of broader risks as you start to move a lot of people online.
My question was basically, there's been a well-publicized spike in phishing attacks in Italy, and I've seen some data suggesting that other forms of cyber attacks are on the rise. Perhaps not for health systems, which is an interesting form of honor among thieves. But I'm curious what you think the impact of that digital divide is between organizations or people who have the capacity to protect themselves and those who don't.
Yeah. Super interesting. Why don't we take the organizations half of this first, and then I think it's really good to explore the implications for individuals, particularly people coming onto the internet for the first time. Who'd like to go first? I can see everybody looking at each other.
I can do the public bit.
Yeah, go on.
And then you guys can sort out the organizations. I think what's really interesting, what's worth remembering in looking at this sort of sudden shift to digital is that, we've talked a lot in the past couple of years about a tech clash. The tech clash never meant that people didn't enjoy the benefits of technology. It was more that people continue to enjoy benefits of technology, but then became more aware of the downsides at the same time. And in the same sense, like as we move more profoundly into this tech dependence that we have during lockdown, that dynamic is still there. We still love the benefits of it, but we're sort of aware of the downsides. And I think, because we're all now so dependent, that vulnerability to the downsides has just become massively amplified and exacerbated. And from my point of view, that means that the need for robust regulation to protect the public is even more profound now than before. So that we shouldn't buy this idea that really we can throw the regulation debate out the window because everyone's really happy with tech now. Like, we've always liked tech, we just don't want all the crap that comes with it. So, that sort of crap element still needs to be addressed. And to give, I think there is an element around media literacy on this, but there's also, the work we'll be publishing next week is looking at there's no effective systems of redress for people when things go wrong. If you do get scammed, where on earth do you go with that? Who do you turn to? And the public really are not getting sufficient answers. So, yes, some media literacy to help people, particularly the sort of newly dependent on tech, to spot bad stuff, but also give people a place to go when bad stuff happens.
Yeah, I find this whole debate around tech clash or no tech clash like endlessly fascinating. And I guess, like you say, it goes all the way to people's very complicated relationship with the technology and the organizations in their lives. I mean, Ed, as somebody who kind of looked at this from the government perspective for a number of years, like, how do you think the crisis, alters the contours of this debate?
Well, I think there are probably two or three things that emerge from it. Clearly, I think the public does remain concerned about tech, although I sometimes wonder how much of that is a kind of media construct. But it's no doubt, we we said before this that we weren't going to spend any time at all on the NHS contact tracing app, except to say that from my perspective, from a sort of frustrated perspective, the press continue to run sort of stories about data privacy and claim that the public are very concerned and may not download it because they're worried about their privacy. And we have this again and again when you have DeepMind being involved in using healthcare data. You know, these are clearly good things that are going to potentially radically transform healthcare, and yet there is this climate of suspicion. So that's something that government should take seriously and address. The second thing about cyber security in general is clearly that FTI has a huge cyber security practice now because companies need to take this stuff seriously. And when we're talking about resilience, imagine what would happen if you wanted to shut the country down quicker than a contagious virus, you would shut down the internet. If I want to start World War III in my lockdown household, I simply turn off the Wi-Fi, at which point my two benign children become murderous with intent, patricide. So, I hope the government will take away from this. Did we prepare for COVID? Well, let's make sure we are properly prepared for vital infrastructure going down. And then I think the third thing, which is really off on a tangent, is in terms of scams and so on, we seem to kind of roll with these scams when, I was struck when the government announced 20,000 new police and how marvelous it was going to be. We're going to have all these policemen on the beat. How much better it would have been if they'd announced 5,000 cyber police who were going to create a really world-class organization built out of all the building blocks we have in this country, like the incredible talent in GCHQ, to really create a world-class capability to try and combat these scams and to educate people about them. We might get a random email from a friend saying this is a scam, but there should be a proper system for dealing with this, because this is where a lot of crime is now moving.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in some ways this goes back to your point, Mike, about like internet era ways of working and what's the right set of like skills and capabilities. Because one of the things that we talked about in some of the work that we published recently was, like, if you think about the way you should support organizations, the things that matter now are questions like cybersecurity and vulnerability, but there are also questions like, by all means, there should be financial support, but you should also think about, if you're trying to pivot small businesses onto the internet, then actually the ability to advertise and navigate the online route to market and to customers matters more than lots of the traditional business skills. But getting those out with the right support maybe is something that's harder to pull off. Okay, I'm going to bring in another question here from, and I'm going to reiterate the rule. We're not going to spend the rest of this conversation talking about contact tracing apps, but I think Alex, Burton, you've got a broader point here around, I guess, the public's relationship with technology as we spend so much more of our lives online. So, right, Alex, we should be able to hear you.
Great. Hi. Thank you. And I promise I'm not wanting to dive into the app. It's a broader issue, really, of which that's I suppose a symptom, and it's a question on sort of trust and culture, where over the last few years we've seen, times perhaps a paradoxical dynamic around trust and data, where you sense there is either unconscious, probably greater acceptance around data gifting to tech companies than governments and their agents. And as we start moving, mentioning the health app, as we start moving and trialing that health app, which could offer and offer demonstrably benefits to the country, do you think this will start causing a cultural shift where the cost-benefit decision-making for individuals of sharing data with government balances towards sharing, rather than that sort of media hype that a couple of the speakers have spoken to previously about data privacy?
What a good question. Mike?
No. So it's a good question. I think there's a couple of things. Whatever this app looks like and how it works, I think it's a wrong way. I understand the point is well made and it just brings the argument into focus, but it's the wrong vehicle to look at the trajectory of that issue of trust and data, largely because human beings are wired for self-preservation, so they will do what stops them dying, and consequently I expect whatever was produced to be adopted in quite a large swathe of population. More importantly, in terms of our trust of government with data, I think actually it comes, the way the question's framed possibly comes from the wrong place, in that most parts of government, like users, whether they know it or not, trust governments with enormous amounts of data already. And the idea that users' data is sort of sovereign to the user, independent, is often misplaced. So, you mentioned DeepMind before. I mean, most people have a view that their health record is theirs and theirs alone, and they can choose to keep it personal. You turn up to your doctor with cholera and you'll find out quickly how personal your health record is. That's always been the case. There's always been judgments made by the state about what's public and what's private. And I think that trust level will wax and wane at whatever time. I've often struggled with the trust level because, frankly, those of us who've been inside government know that many of the data handling practices within government are largely due to the structures of government, much less to do with the needs of individuals and to sustain or manage any trust level. So I think what people will should start to see is they just want government to be better at data management, full stop. That will create more trust. It used to make me laugh with people sort of on the data conspiracy theories within government. Well, you have to start working there. You'd suddenly find out you weren't going to run any conspiracy theories with the quality of data streams flowing across, 28 departments and 330 agencies. So I think it's a very good question. I think the bigger issue is, do we trust our government to have competent data management systems in place, and things like interoperability and sharing? It goes actually to the heart of the matter of, does that work under a new public management model? Yeah. And I don't think it does. I think one of the problems a big problem we've got in the UK, very much parochially now, is the different formats of government, whether you be in a NDPB, whether you be in a trading fund, whether you be arm's length government, arm's length, or if you have a Haldane type arrangement for your funding, all of which means that you have a slightly different, somewhat unique approach to data management. And therefore you get ridiculous positions like HMRC not sharing the list of records with Companies House, although they are the registrar of companies, because, we're special and unique and different. They are the problems that need sorting out for government. Then we can talk about whether users have trust in the government as a whole. I think at the moment we can really talk about whether users have trust in individual arms of government, and that we're having that conversation about the NHS at the moment. Yeah. But if it's a whole of government model, then the whole of government have got some substantial work to do on raising that trust level.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things this is all really highlighted for me is the acceleration of sort of, maybe collapse is too strong a word, right? But like watching 20th century institutions try to adapt for a very 21st century crisis, I think kind of highlights a lot of these challenges that we've got coming towards us, and the gap that used to exist between people in positions of authority and the public has now been obliterated by the internet. And that, has all these ripple effects through the way that government needs to be structured, the role of institutions, whether you can really manage a bureaucracy in the way that we've tried to in the past.
So just picking up on that, Chris, I think there's also an interesting thing which the internet has opened up, which is people's ability to watch alternative government responses in real time. So, we've always had that thing of, oh, Finland's really good at education. And then people say, oh, but Finland's different and you can't really compare. Actually, we're all being hit by the same problem at the same time. And people can use the internet and say, oh, look, Germany's done this quite well. South Korea's done that really well. Oh, Italy looks a bit shoddy. But people are starting to see, compare in real time different approaches by government. And I think that's incredibly sort of empowering for the public to start to be able to weigh up who's doing things well and demand more of their government as well.
Empowering for the public, and I guess hard for people in political positions and positions of authority, Ed.
Well, I mean, I think the whole frustration, and Mike, I'm sure will remember this from his time running the government digital service, of dealing with these terrible Victorian structures that exist in the British government and no doubt governments elsewhere, you know. And it goes back again to what White was saying about who's going to succeed in this new world and who's going to be left behind, because too many companies, and I think a lot of government as well, regards digital as a bolt-on, that we carry on doing exactly the same thing, but we just do it online. And what I always loved about the work that Mike was doing, and the bit where sort of scales fell from my eyes, if you like, is that digital is your excuse to completely reinvent government and how you do it. And I always say, revealing my middle-class background, that my dinner party skit is that I would abolish all government departments. I mean, I think it's bizarre. And I think to a certain extent what you've seen, you know, obviously every CEO, the chief executive of Microsoft saying we've had 2 years of digital advancement in two months. We've built a hospital, albeit we didn't have to build the structure, in 9 days for the Nightingale. You've had the whole of government working on one task, admittedly the biggest task we faced since the Second World War, yet you can never get the whole of government, as Mike alluded with the HMRC and Companies House, to work on any task together. I knew as a minister that the minute I came up with a proposal that required the help of another department, I might as well just forget about it because it wasn't invented in their department. And digital should be able to be the catalyst that sweeps away departmental fiefdom and completely reinvents services. And, you know, I've never run a huge business, and what I say, if there are business people watching, may roll their eyes, but it seems to me that one of the reasons Amazon has succeeded and others are having to catch up is because it could start from ground zero. And I admit that starting from ground zero is clearly extremely difficult for government, but it would be an amazing thing, and it won't happen, by the way, but it would be an amazing thing if government walked away from this crisis thinking, let's reinvent the whole way we do things. And digital is the reason we have to do that.
Yeah. And look, let me bring in, now I'm going to pronounce this terribly and you can correct me, Agnieszka, because you've got a point around broad opportunities from the pandemic.
Yes, thank you. And actually to add on Ed's point of reinventing things, how they are done in technology. Of course, the current situation and kind of how we tackle what is happening right now is important, but I think it's also interesting to kind of look beyond that and think of this indirect or secondary impact of technology, and because we're going to do things differently, how this will impact. And kind of in my question here in the chat, I've suggested, given the way we work may move to be a bit more remote, perhaps the office space or won't be as needed, or there will be less of it, could be used for housing, to tackle as one of kind of the issues. But I was wondering what the panelists think of those kind of long-term issues that could be resolved through technology. Thanks.
Okay. So I think we're all optimists. I hope we are. You know, what are some of the good things that could, you know, come out of this, you know, if we manage the, you know, I hesitate to say return to normality, but
it depends what you think is a good thing or not. I mean, my instinct, because I'm cynical, is that we will go back to doing things the way we've always done them. Partly, actually, putting aside the adjective cynical, partly because, as I think somebody said earlier in the discussion, you know, we're all human, we crave social interaction. And, you know, we all want to go to the cinema, the theatre, quite rightly, and restaurants and so on. So office life, if you like, there is a reason for office life. But there may be some flexibility. I mean, talking to BT, for example, this is a great example where all their call centre operators now work from home. They've done that in a few weeks. But it was interesting, of course, that there are regulations. The reason call centres exist is there are regulations, because if I'm, for example, in this discussion, a call centre operator, and my wife walks in and looks over my shoulder and sees your details, Chris, about your mobile phone, that's not very good. But BT's had to address that in a matter of weeks, and we now have to, and the regulations now have to catch up. So there is an opportunity to change office culture, and there'll be opportunities for any venture capitalists out there, for example, not robot chefs necessarily, but certainly people being able to, in a restaurant, it'll probably be quite normal to order from your table rather than interact with a waiter. And we'll also get used to always using sanitizer gel when we go into an office on the rare occasion. Transport, I think, potentially could really shift. If we get on and allow e-scooters, for example, and we've got bikes and shared bike schemes, we really could see a modal shift in transport in cities, which could be a very good thing.
Yeah. Catherine, what do you wish for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, technology has enabled us to do an awful lot over the past 2 months, but it still feels like a half-life. I mean, I don't think any of us would choose to continue to live in this way. I think it has thrown up some places actually where sort of things work surprisingly badly. If you think about certainly school, homeschooling, apart from that I'm not a great homeschooler, the level of digital capability within schools and within school administrations is woeful. And I'm not the only parent who's sort of looking at uneditable PDFs of maths questions for an 8-year-old that just can take up your entire day. So I think it's enabled a lot, but it's actually shown where there are some things which just have an awful long way to go. But I agree. I was actually going to raise the same example as Ed in terms of the call center example is a really good one, because it's not just a shift from home. That suddenly becomes a job that you can do between school drop-off and school pickup.
Exactly.
And it sort of becomes like a cottage industry job where almost, you become like an Uber driver call center. Say, okay, I've got, 4 hours clear now. I'll do 4 hours of call. And that's, and phenomenally empowering new bit almost of a gig economy that opens up. I would say though, obviously, we don't want that to open up with all the problems that we associate with the existing gig economy. And I suppose more broadly, from our point of view, where we see an opportunity is really to take this shift, and it's tricky because it's happening so quickly, but take this shift as an opportunity that if we are creating new digital structures, we do it having already learned some of the lessons of the past decade of where things need to be. You need safeguards in place before you set off on this road, where you need to think through the impacts that you're going to have on society all the way down the line, and not just kind of play around with people's lives and then go, oops, that went wrong.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to bring in Lizzie, because I think there's a point in here that you wanted to ask around like local government in particular. And I guess, for lots of us, locality is a big part of our experience at the moment as we're locked in our homes. Lizzie.
Hi there, thank you, and thanks for an interesting discussion. I apologise in part because my question is quite specific, but Mike, I did gasp when I heard you say that local government was having a good pandemic, but maybe I've not been so focused on the tech side because I know they're finding all sorts of challenges in other ways. But I am really interested that you say it is going well on the tech side, and I'd like to hear a bit more about that, because my understanding is that the challenge for local government has always been that they see technology and digitalisation as part of a process and use it on their existing processes rather than recognising how transformative it can be to their services, and using it in ways to kind of reimagine some of the relationships, some of the partnerships and things like that. And I guess I'd be really interested to hear a bit more of a description as to why you think they're having a good pandemic.
Oh, well, firstly, let me clarify. I should have been clearer. They're having a good pandemic because of how they're reacting to the coronavirus, and they're having a good pandemic in many ways because they have to, because they're the provider of last resort. I didn't actually mean they're having a good pandemic just from a technology point of view. There are some local governments, it's a broad church, there are some local governments. Hackney is a very good example of where the work that's already had started is helping them take, frankly, pretty poorly formed central government directives that are chucked over a wall and turn them into very good services and integrate them into their service mix. So really, I rather than say the whole of local government's having a good pandemic, I think on a sort of human level they are, by and large. I think there are some very good examples of where local government by necessity are quickly having appropriate digital responses to meet the needs of their populations. I think the biggest problem local government is saddled with, and it has been for decades, is that much of their data and their digital services capability is locked into vast contracts with Northgate, Capita and other providers of ERP systems and HR systems. It's a problem nobody wants to sort out. It needs sorting out now because we have to get close to people very quickly. So the problem of sort of, central government dictating lists of people to be shielded, is both a sort of a GP level and also a local government level. The absence of appropriate data interoperability mechanisms that can be delivered at scale nationally via local government organisations is now a clear problem. And we've just had, and Ed might want to close his ears, but we've just had, an era of sort of devolution where we say, well, local government's over there, we'll largely starve it funds, but we're going to, whatever policy requirement, we're going to largely chuck it at local government and let them get on with it. I'm being hugely unfair, but by and large, and they've coped very well with that. What we now see, I think, as citizens, is that we want to see that alignment in places around things like public health, around the gap between adult social care, mental health, places like that are very hard to fill service mixes in. You need good data provision in them, and we don't have it. So I think local governments have stepped into that well. A lot of them deserve a lot of credit, but this crisis has shown, like no other, that we've not been paying attention to those spaces for 10, 15 years. And as one current minister told me, it's because there's no votes in it. And that is shocking, because there should be no votes in this stuff.
Yeah.
But we should just get on with it because we run the government.
Some of this stuff, I think, falls in the camp of, this question of institutions and bureaucracies built for a different era, and like kind of impact of the internet exposing that now, like the size of a typical local authority is like a very, what's the word?
Arbitrary.
Like it's arbitrary, and it's definitely not the optimal way to, like, it feels to me like through technology, a lot of decisions should get a lot closer to communities, but then others maybe should be rolled up, you should run transport at a city region level, not a local authority level. Is there an opportunity, do you think this crisis is highlighting that, and does it give us an opportunity to rethink some of those structures?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to fly off on a random debate about local government reorganisation.
We'll come back shortly, don't worry.
My paradox is I'd abolish every district council in the country. Weirdly, that would bring decisions potentially closer to people. But and I think Mike would agree with me that government as a platform, local government as a platform.
Correct.
90% of all local government services are, for the sake of argument, vanilla services. I mean, you could have an argument about how frequently you empty the bins, and Eric Pickles, when he was local government minister, did manage to construct an argument about how frequently you empty the bins. But fundamentally, it should be pretty simple to have bin delivery broadly the same around the country. That is not to rubbish local democracy, where there are important local decisions, particularly around the future of local communities and how they adapt, where local government plays a vital role. But there's a lot of crap you can remove.
That's right.
That is being reinvented again and again and again by local councils that shouldn't be.
Correct. In fact, I can support Ed on that. Let me be a bit clear with an example. In the UK, we have gov.uk Notify, which has just sent out its billionth message. That is just a phenomenal success, 4 years. And what Notify does, as I'm sure you all know, is tells you if you've got an appointment, or tells you by SMS or letter, and it allows teams in any form of government to immediately, nearly immediately, online, create a sort of messaging service to the recipients. And it's a brilliant piece of work. It's now used in Canada, Australia, some other countries, because like it's one of those why wouldn't you services. Like, it was why wouldn't you? It's there, it's almost free, you just do it. And yet we barely use it in local government, and we're still sending out letters and so on and so forth. So my point about devolution was that Ed's quite right. That for me should be mandated. Like, you should just use that. The value you create, the cost value could then, that's a political decision. You can give it back to local authorities, whatever. My point is, it just makes life so much easier for everybody, particularly at the moment. And if this crisis and crises like it show anything, it's where the I mean, like that issue is for real in machinery of government wants. It's for people like me that actually like this stuff. But at the moment, people are now starting to ask that question. Like, if I can get an SMS from sort of a big government department telling me I have an interview a week on Thursday, why can't I get one for my district council? But it should use the same system. We need that level of attention to our machinery of government following this crisis, because I'm afraid it's in that sort of very sort of transactional and very sort of data-rich detail. That's where our response to this sort of stuff lies.
Yeah, I agree, and I think one thing that we've been talking about for a period of time now, and others have as well, is the delta between my experience as a digital consumer and both the user experience and the speed of response versus my interactions with the state. And I do wonder whether through the crisis, as I continue to experience lots of services, commercial services standing up and delivering when I thought maybe they would fold, versus government sometimes struggling and then not using the tools that are available to it, could end up being an enormous source of frustration for people and go on to damage a lot of trust. Can I bring in Andrew, because you've got the other side of this kind of point, which is maybe this is a moment to do something bold. I'll let you put it in your own terms.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So I guess I'll try and keep it quick, but a few months ago, it felt like nothing had really happened in the UK for 3.5 years. Now everything is happening, and there's this real window of opportunity that may close again in some weird normality that we may or may not return to. So while the window is open, what's the boldest thing that governments should do?
Okay.
That's a difficult one.
Well, Ed, we know what you think,
Mike.
that everything will revert to how it was.
After they have, as Ed says, after they've ended the culture and the operations of departmentalisation, which would be the single biggest thing you could do, I'm afraid I'm going to go for a machinery of government thing that you won't guess, but the biggest single they can do will be abolish the Treasury Green Book and all related business cases, because it's just corporate sci-fi. It's just rubbish. And the idea that governments know what we'll be spending on X in 2024, it is as ridiculous as you think. And yet we try continually to make our bets and make our future based on business cases which are literally made up in 2 minutes.
Catherine?
I think it's perhaps not the wildest, boldest thing, but certainly the thing that I would like to see happening, if we relate it to this conversation, is to see a massive improvement in how the public sector procures technology. So I think, it actually relates a bit to Mike's point around the business case, is having a proper understanding of why government or why the public sector wants to use a piece of technology. What problem does it think it's solving? But also, where is the social value in that, and where is the societal impact of that? So I think one of the huge problems is thinking about public sector use of technology in this very sort of financially transactional way, where, to Mike's example just now, if you thought through the whole impact of, rolling something out to local government and the savings and the benefits that would come through doing something holistically, I think it could be really transformational. So I think, in a moment where the potential of technology to support the public sector is becoming more apparent, I think there's a massive danger that government will just reach for the nearest, shiniest thing that looks like it's going to save people's lives, when actually this is the moment where we have to think really profoundly about what it is we think that technology is doing for the public interest as a whole, and how do we start to enable people to procure technology that will serve that interest in the long term.
Yeah. Do you think, Ed, maybe your manifesto writing days are behind you, but or maybe not, who knows? But are there other areas of public policy where there's an opportunity here for technology to be really transformational? Could we, rewire our transport networks in cities, or like rethink the way that we do housing or the sorts of businesses that we support, or is that just too far-fetched?
Well, I think leaving aside my stuff about abolishing government entirely or government departments and having one government where you set yourself tasks and bring together the best people to deliver them, as indeed Tony Blair has said in a couple of seminars that I've tuned into on the back of the stuff that you're publishing about, never has there been a moment which has highlighted the ability of government to get people in a room, the best people in a room, the best logistics people, for example, on PPE, and set them a task and let them get on with it. So I think that should be one lesson. I was thinking about the coronavirus, how we've tackled it. And the last Labour government did set strategies, for example, for cancer. But if you took an analogy where you could say the earlier you are diagnosed with cancer, clearly the more likely you are to survive, the kind of digital transformation you could introduce to get people tested regularly for the most common cancers, and to ensure, as Mike was saying, via things like Notify, that they're kept up to date, healthy people, arguably healthy people, those are the kind of transformations I would like to see. So I'm sounding a bit like I'm saying, again, bolt technology onto an existing system. I'm trying not to say that. I'm trying to say reinvent how you engage with the user, in this case, people who could potentially be suffering a certain type of cancer, and use technology to completely transform your relationship with them. I mean, again, it sounds like a bit of a skit, but it is amazing that blind people still get letters from the NHS, for example. I mean, it's bizarre.
Yeah. And I think there's something in all of this about, like, as we try to learn the lessons of the crisis, there'll be an enormous temptation to second guess a bunch of decisions, whereas what you really should ask is, what were the systems and underlying structures that caused us to behave in the way we have and let us down on so many fronts? Okay, I want to just connect this. We're going to be up against time soon, but Maddie has a very practical question around, actually, we talked a lot about good practice and the sort of internet era ways of working, but how do you actually make it stick? Maddie.
Hi. My question is just generally around advice from everybody on helping any organisation embed the good service delivery changes that have occurred due to the pandemic. So we've been talking about things have happened. It's great. It's really good. How do we keep that going? Let the bad stuff go, but keep the good stuff carrying on. And then also a kind of a part two, I guess, is how do we reach those organisations that didn't move their services online, either because they didn't know that they could, or because they just made the choice not to because they thought it was too difficult, or from a charity sector, which is where I work, because their boards didn't understand. So it's that kind of how do we reach the folk who didn't move their services online, and then how do we kind of embed the changes that have occurred, the good stuff?
Great question.
Shall I have a go?
Go on, Mike, and then we'll take the others.
This is somewhat of a merciless answer, but there is so much information now online about service provision and about how to create service, digitize service, and so on, that one has got to be, can't say for all organizations, but in many cases, willfully ignorant to not be able to find that information. I mean, obviously the next part of your question is how do you then embrace it and get it in? I grant you that. I think I think the biggest change for all organizations is to recognize that they are service organizations. I mean, we live in an era of digital services, no question about that. And most organizations say, oh, I'm a charity or I'm a bank or whatever. I'm not, I just happen to have a bit of digital. Actually, no, all organizations now are first and foremost digital services organizations by and large. And if your board and executive, whether you be a charity or a bank, don't understand that, then that's the problem. And how do you change that? Well, there's a sort of market economics model of how you generally change it. And I think that there's that in the third sector, it is particularly difficult. I do think we need some sort of non-exec oversight and some sort of funding measure to ensure that as many organisations are or engage in this stuff, because frankly, there's a lot of learned helplessness. Or they'll go, oh, it's very difficult, when actually it really isn't anymore. That sort of, you get away with that 15 years ago, you can't. So I think embracing, following people who are really making it simple, like Kate Tarling, who is sort of probably one of the best voices on how the simplification of how organizations become service-led organizations. People like that now are, and she's helping the Citizens Advice Bureau, for instance, but there's plenty of this sort of stuff online. So I'd go and firstly engage with that. It's an endless problem about how you shift boards and executives. And, I've seen it particularly in the third sector. I don't know, and frankly, I don't know how many can keep getting away with it, saying, "Oh, it's just too difficult for us," because it isn't. I'm not sure that's the answer that you want, but I think we often need fresh blood in running those organisations.
Yeah, Catherine, what has your work shown around this?
We've done quite a lot of work sort of helping build digital capacities in charities and doing digital leadership training for leaders in charities. And I think, I think to an extent Mike's right, but the problem is that the information is there, but it's not in words that are relatable to people who run those organizations. And I think there's a lot of, I think this is true of kind of the digital project more generally, is like just going in and speaking digital words at people in ways that are not meaningful to them doesn't help people at all. And in fact, what you tend to see is really awful projects where a well-intentioned charity says, oh, well, we need to build an app then. And it's like, please don't build an app. It's never going to be the solution. So I think that there's a real thing where almost you need to embed these lessons into people who are relatable to the people that you're talking to. So there's an organization, CAST, which is doing really excellent work in supporting charities to embrace digital technologies. And I think we need to recognize that these are organizational problems. They're not tech problems. They're understanding problems and allowing people to start from where they are and leverage. I mean, I don't agree with you, Mike, in terms of like, basically we just need to wait for these people to die off, because I think you need to leverage their amazing expertise and sector expertise. The people who run charities are phenomenally committed, so generous with their time, have so much understanding of very specific issues. We need to hold on to that and sort of guide them gently into understanding how to adapt their practices to the digital era.
Okay, sorry if I've misspoken. I don't want them to die off. I would very much like to continue doing the job. My point is those people who are in positions in those authorities or those organisations who continue to pedal the line that it's basically just too difficult. I think there needs to be an intervention there, because that's it. Some time ago, I think that was a fair line, but now, with digital services creation being much easier and prevalent, I don't think that level of defence is fair anymore.
Oh, and I agree. I think in any leadership position, the ability to understand the impact of digital technology should be the same as your ability to read a balance sheet. It's not okay to just go, oh, it's tech and I don't get it, but here we've got a bright young thing in a t-shirt who's going to explain it all. It's part of your duties as a leader in any organization to get that. But I think sometimes the tech side of the world also has to be more understanding that their language is not meaningful to people in other places.
Absolutely. Ed, would you like a last word on how we make some of the positives stick?
The last word actually echoes what Catherine said, which is it's not about the tech. It's about leadership. And it's a leadership on both sides. And I think it's a really good point to end on, picking up on what Catherine said, that to a certain extent, people like me who really passionately believe in this digital agenda don't appreciate that actually it's up to the tech world to communicate its benefits as much as it is the other side, as it were, the people who we're trying to get to adopt, to embrace it. So there's a communication challenge for the tech world to say this is why this stuff is so important and so urgent. But I'm again cynical and depressed in the sense that I do think this comes down to individual leadership, and the winners and the people who embrace what they've learned during this crisis will be individual leaders who have the vision to take it forward, and the losers will be people who go straight back to, inverted commas, normal service.
Yeah, okay. I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there. We are up against time. I think we've covered an awful lot of ground. I'm not going to attempt to summarize right now, other than to say it's been illuminating across, you know, the kind of impacts of technology, what it means for government, what we think the future might hold. Huge thank you to Mike and to Catherine and to Ed for taking the time to join us and answer questions and get stuck into the debate. Thanks for everybody who's been here with us and asking questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to deal with all of them, but we will be back for future sessions, and we will be in touch to tell you a bit more about what is on the agenda in due course. And if you want to pull down a copy of the report that TBI published around this, then you can find it on institute.global, and it's called Digital Policy for a Lockdown. I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you again, panelists and guests, and hope to see you all again very soon. Bye.